Well, Jonathan, we talked about already many times that we want people to succeed and we want to teach them how to do it right. And no place, by my experience, I know it's like talking to a nuclear scientist about how to build an atomic bomb, talking to you about planting trees. But no activity is more critical in what we're trying to do than knowing how and where and when to plant a tree.
Absolutely. This segment is near and dear to my heart. In my lifetime, I've probably killed more trees than anybody in the world. And so I've learned a lot along the way. I've planted many, many thousands of trees. So what we're gonna try and illustrate for you guys today is what not to do, more importantly, than what to do. Where would you like to start?
Well, let's start with the hole in the ground. Well, let's back up. Let's start where, okay? Now, we're standing in one of our deer orchards, and this, some time ago, was a pretty rough place. Where we plant our trees in wildlife management often is not like your backyard. Yeah, so first thing you gotta do is clear out a spot, and you're gonna have some time where you're gonna have to really get control of the vegetation. We'll talk about that later. But this is a good spot. It's got good soil. You've got to look at the soil. We have a segment where we show you how to take a soil sample and all that, but where you have good soil. And then we talk about spacing, how close do you want them together? I like 25 feet.
Well, it depends on what's the mature canopy size of the tree. You don't want to give it too little room. You'd rather give it too much, but I think 25-foot spacing is probably adequate for the tree we've got here. So what we've got here is one of your offspring here, a Dr. Deere pear, that's a little bit over a year old. We would never recommend planting trees in August, but for illustrative purposes, that's what we're going to do here today. In terms of the size of the hole, that's a religious discussion, as a lot of things are when it comes to horticulture. Some folks will tell you to dig a hole twice as the size of the container to give it a whole lot of room to spread out in some really friendly soil. My advice, my recommendation in this type of environment when you're planting in these wildlife conditions would be to give the plant 3 to 4 inches maybe of loose soil surrounding. So I'd say maybe 1.5 times the size of the pot.
That's what we do, yep.
The biggest thing that you can do wrong when planting trees, and there's really 2 main no-nos, but the biggest one for me is planting depth. If you plant a tree too deep down in a hole and bury the roots, you totally prevent the plant from gas exchange, and it will suffocate and die.
Yep.
Best case scenario, it will be stunted and really struggle for years. So that's getting the elevation right is the number one concern. And then once you've got the tree planted, be surprised, I'd say the biggest killer of trees is overwatering. So understanding how much water and when is critical.
Yeah, you have to recognize when they want to drink. And we'll be doing a segment later on maintaining your deer orchards. But yeah, that's exactly the way I do it. And we've had a lot of success. So, but you're the guy to do it. Now, the other thing is, okay, we got this plant in the ground. Okay. All right. What's the next thing we do?
Well, getting it protected from the wildlife that you're trying to attract is pretty darn important. I think if you plant these without proper trunk protection, all you're doing is putting something out there for the animals to destroy before they're of size to actually give them the benefit that you intended.
Yeah, if you put this tree out there just like it stands here, every buck on this place is going to think that you have provided him with a wonderful toy to play with, and you will lose them the first fall, because they'll come up and whip them to death, and then you've lost them. Another thing that I want to get your opinion on this is we put tree tubes around them, because there's other things besides deer that this is soft bark, and rabbits and rats will gnaw on the bottom of your trees, so we put tree tubes around them.
Yeah, I would normally, in a regular landscape situation, pedestrian landscape situation, I would not advise to use those because they're just not necessary. You see them, and I don't think there's much need except for mechanical damage done by maintenance equipment. But out here in this condition, these trees are going to be on their own, and that actually, takes me to another topic, and that's, selecting trees that can make it on their own. these trees are not all created equal. The ones that can survive in drought conditions, extreme heat, extreme cold, and still produce the vegetation, the food, and the cover that you're trying to provide for the wildlife.
Yeah, absolutely. But planting it right is important. We'll talk about maintenance later, but please do it right. We'll show you the methods that we use. What we do to protect the trees from the bucks rubbing them is we just take a utility panel, a regular utility panel that's 52 inches high, and then we cut it into 1 foot pieces and we make a triangle around it, drive a T-post in the ground. You can zip tie it to the cage to the T-post, and that will protect your deer. Most bucks are not gonna work out on this thing. So that's the way to plant a tree.
Well, and the last thing we ought to talk about is the seasonality. We're in East Texas today, and I would say the high temperature today here is probably going to be in the mid to high 90s. Again, not the recommended time frame, but Dr. Kroll is out here. He's going to nurse this one along and make sure that it gets what it needs to get through this first summer. But in this part of the country, in the South, I would say as soon as you get out of the 80s, in high temperatures, you've got a green light to go with pretty high success expectations, and go all the way through winter. Very little freeze risk on newly planted trees in this part of the country. That's certainly different, and you can talk to a little bit of what goes on up north.
Up north, unfortunately, I prefer to plant my trees in the fall because it's a lot in the South because, like you said, it's nicer growing conditions. They're going to make roots, and they'll come into the spring ahead of time. But in the north, you don't want to do that. They've got frost heave and everything else. You're going to have to plant in the spring. So as soon as danger of frost is gone, that's when you want to plant trees up there. Of course, the trees you plant at that point in time will not have leafed out, so and they should be hardened off to cold. So in the spring, early spring in the fall, in the early fall in the South.
And we'll have all this information available in other segments and also on the website with our planting recommendations to help you guys avoid making mistakes and wasting money.